Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paweł Lewicki, and I'm an Associate Director of the European Studies Center at the University of Pittsburgh. And I would like to welcome you to the first lecture in our spring online lecture series under the title Europe Today, which is simultaneously a course at University of Pittsburgh for students at the European Studies Center. And I would like to welcome our students. This lecture series is also in cooperation with European Studies Association and is co-sponsored by the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies at the the University of Pittsburgh. Today's speaker is Ondřej Horký-Hlucháň, and Ondřej is a senior researcher at the Center for Global Political Economy of the Institute of International Relations in Prague. He has a PhD in International Economic Relations and a Master in International Trade and European Integration from the University of Economics in Prague. Among other positions, he worked as Deputy Director for Research at the Institute for International Relations. His research interests include the governance of global and sustainable development, development cooperation, and gender. He's a member of the Executive Committee of the European Association of Development Research and Training Institutes, and a member of the International Institute for International Relations Board, and the president of trade unions there. So the title of his presentation today is Insights into National and European Political Landscape after Presidential Elections in the Czech Republic. And I guess I don't need to explain it more. I think we know already what to expect. I just want to mention that after Ondřej's talk, we will have time for questions, for a Q&A round. You will have the opportunity to ask your questions also while Ondřej is still talking, to ask your questions in a box, in a Q&A box on Zoom. And I will include these questions in our discussion afterwards. Yeah, that's it. Ondřej, I think the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for this opportunity, and I hope it's a pleasure to have the occasion to give you an insight in the current campaign for the runoff of the presidential elections of the Czech Republic. And I will try to, well, this is a very small country in a way. The Czech Republic has 10 million inhabitants and population, so it's pretty small. It's basically the size of Georgia or North Carolina. And also I'm happy that we'll have the occasion for a Q&A session, so really don't hesitate to ask additional questions, because at this level I really don't know much about, say, politics in Georgia or North Carolina. So so to give you more context. Now, oops, I just lost the control of my slides somehow. Yeah, okay, I'm back. Also, as a little disclaimer at this point, I'm not a political scientist. Most of my research goes towards the global south. At the same time, of course, I try to follow the foreign policy, the European policies at large. So what I also tried to do in this presentation, rather the end, to connect what happens in the Czech Republic with larger trends in the slightly like bigger region of the Visegrad countries, including Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia, and also beyond, going for the whole European Union. So really, it's more of an insight without having any special methodological approaches or other things. So I would like to answer two questions in this presentation. First, why is this presidential election relevant at all? Because we will see there are some particular aspects of the political system in the Czech Republic. So it's kind of representative of the Central European political systems, but there are some peculiarities. And the question I already announced about what does it say about broader trends in European politics, really going to the sense of Europe Today series of lectures. So first of all, I would like to present the role of presidents in the Czech political model more in a longer term. Then I would focus on the main factors in the run-up to these election, and then go the first round that took place actually last week, go into the runoff that will take place next Friday and Saturday, because in the Czech Republic we vote on 2 days actually, which is already quite unusual for European countries. And then I would conclude with some reflections on the larger sense of the developments in my country. So starting with the presidents, now you can see all the presidents, starting with the first president, Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, that the kind of like a founder of the country in 1918. By the way, also to the support of the Wilson's policy and the support of the United States, which actually made that the Czechoslovakia that was created was actually even larger than it should be, following the very principles of nations as put forward by the United States. But I think why I put the last Habsburg rule as the first picture is that even though the Czech Republic very quickly shifted from being part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire towards a much smaller republic in a parliamentary system, pretty also resilient democracy. I mean, one of the most resilient democracies in the region up to the Second World War. So it means that there was always a parliamentary system with the main power in the hands of the government and the prime minister. But somehow this kind of like monarchist picture of the ruler as a very important person for the identification of the country was already looming there. And also, even though the quality of the democracy in the so-called First Republic from the 1918 to 1938 was pretty good, actually the castle, which is kind of like a nickname for the presidency of the country, because the seat is the Prague castle, which is pretty big and dominating the city. So the castle was also a center of power, and many of the important decisions were actually made by the first president disregarding the parliament, like unofficially, right? You know, the centrality of the power. Also, moving forward to the series of presidents during the communist era from 1948 to 1989, then actually also the presidents were quite powerful, because most of the time they were the same people who were also the general secretaries of the Communist Party. So at that time, even though there was a kind of larger Politburo that decided with more or less involvement and participation of other members, the president was most of the time connected with the Secretary General. So still the power was pretty concentrated in that person of the president. Then moving to a person you probably heard about, Václav Havel, the first democratic president of Czechoslovakia, then of the Czech Republic when it split with the Slovakia in 1993. Someone who served, as you see on the right side, he basically served 2 terms. And yeah, he was a very much important figure, former dissident, and someone who had a huge authority, and who already at the time also had those say conflicts with prime ministers over nominations of some ministers who he wouldn't like. So there was always this kind of like intervention from the presidency towards the government. And it somehow also continued with the next president, Václav Klaus, who was this kind of like a neoliberal figure who brought first as a Minister of Finance prosperity, deregulation, in the kind of optimism that we had in the early 90s and early 2000s about globalization and so on, who turned then pretty Eurosceptical, and actually they were, again, even though by constitutions he is supposed just to sign the international agreements that are negotiated by the government, still there were a lot of conflicts with the government at the time when he refused to sign the Lisbon Treaty, and which would be a pretty strong block for the European integration to go forward. Then next, again, for 2 terms, and still the current president, Miloš Zeman, again, like Václav Klaus, a former prime minister. So far, you can see with that last 3 presidents basically served 2 terms. 2 of them were former prime ministers and very important figures in the political landscape that could somehow afford to also to have those conflicts, because their legitimacy was very much accumulated through their previous functions or through the moral authority, like for the president Václav Havel. Now, at the same time, for the last, the thing is, basically until 2012, the presidents were elected by the parliament, as it very often happens in a parliamentary republic. But since there were like several repeated rounds, because the 2 chambers of the parliament had problems to agree on a majority person to elect as president, and finally it went to Václav Klaus in that period. So there was a kind of like at the time consensus by the political elites actually to get rid of that responsibility to elect presidents and to give it to people. So the constitution was amended so that presidents are elected in a 2-round majority system, starting with 2013 elections with the current president Miloš Zeman. But at the same time, the constitution was not amended to enlarge the competences of the president. So now you have a very strong president with a really strong mandate. And also, if you look at the participation at the presidential elections, actually you see that it is higher, even higher than for the parliament, either chamber deputies or even for the Senate, where very often it's very low. So people really like to participate in these elections. It's very much personalized, sure, because you don't vote for your MPs by region. So there is a kind of like proximity felt by people and identification with their president. So the legitimacy is pretty strong, but the competencies are not. And if you go through the competencies, as there are now in the Czech Republic, you will see that the actual rights of the presidents are very limited. So of course, the president can veto any law coming from the parliament, but very easily by an absolute majority of 50%. The parliament has just overruled it, and I don't really remember if any initiative of law would actually be stopped because of the veto, that it would be reconsidered. This just does not happen. Then the president has also the right to appoint And now this is the one very important point, to appoint the prime minister after the general elections. And by the constitution, because so far we just had like male presidents, he has the 2 attempts to nominate the prime minister. Usually it should be the one who won the elections, either the party or the coalition, as it is stated. But actually, that was the problem with the current president, Miloš Zeman, who actually overreached this and actually nominated a prime minister who didn't have any majority in the parliament. So around 2015-16, we've had like for like I think almost 9 months, we have the government that was basically nominated by the president, and sometimes you could say just like their only competence was to be their friend and or supporters. And well, then the parliament launched a general election, and the government was never actually approved, you know. So we are really starting to see that in this model, the kind of like legitimacy that the presidents, or so far when they felt they had like a lot of power for the legitimacy coming from the elections, they would actually step outside the constitution and do something that was like against the sense, if not the word of the constitution. Also, the appointment of constitutional and Supreme Court judges, but this needs to be then approved by the Senate. So this is very limited. You really cannot go against the parliament. Where the president is pretty free to choose whoever they want is the board members of the National Bank, ambassadors, professors, and generals. So, for instance, for the university professors and generals, the current president Miloš Zeman actually refused to appoint some of them, and then they created some, I would say, even like cultural wars between the Ministry of Education and the universities, finishing up with the president not inviting the rectors of the universities to celebrations of National Day, and so on. I think that this is really kind of like for me, it was really interesting, because when I did this list through the competitions, that I realized that the current president Zeman actually tried to step over all of these competences. You know, I gave it the example with the appointment of the prime minister. Actually, now he thinks about, even though the term of the presiding judge of the Constitutional Court ends in August, and President Zeman's term ends in March, he wants to appoint a new president, like who would start like 5 months after his term is ended. So we still can lead to some kind of like a crisis. I wouldn't think really a constitutional crisis, but some kind of like political crisis, because he may use the rest of his term really to do this kind of thing. I don't really know how to call it otherwise. And also the other, just to go quickly, of course, the president represents the country as a head of state. And again, with President Zeman, it really happened sometimes where he would not actually present the positions of the government and go beyond. We'll see to what extent the current President Zeman has very strong, or rather had very strong links with Russia and China, motivated mostly also by business interest of his friends and so on. So yeah, so that the problem is that we have a president with a very strong legitimacy coming from the popular vote. People like to elect strong personalities, I would also say, more generally, but it very often happens that those personalities are actually going beyond their competencies. So what I would call kind of like there are conditions for disruptions and kind of like soft cohabitation, even though we are not in any semi-presidential system like in France, this kind of like conflicts between the government and the president can very much happen. But at the same time, as I said, when the presidents come with strong legitimacy, that also means that that they are kind of like lessened, and there's this kind of like monarchic idea of a strong leader. So the way that the president determines the kind of like discourse on several issues, coming up with the issues, puts them on the political agenda, it still gives them a lot of power. Now, and I think the question is whether the Czech Republic would be on a path to go towards like more normalcy and having kind of like more modest, more normal president, as you would have, say, in Austria or in Germany, or we would continue with having a very strong personality that would be in a clash with the other political powers. Now I would like to really just to go through the most important events or trends that would determine the political situation until now. Now, you can already see the picture of Ondřej Babiš, who is the former prime minister from 2017 to the end of 2021, and who was also minister of finance, and in a way de facto prime minister of the previous government that was led by the Social Democrats. Now, I think one of the major events or trends that happened that led also to the end of his government were actually the way that the government handled the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think just to show you the statistics, Czechia actually, even though the health system is very resilient and very, very good, I think I would like for the whole of Europe situation. The thing is that Czechia ranks really at the front of the number of deaths per capita, and you can really see. I mean, you don't really have more developed countries except for Hungary, on the or to some extent to Bulgaria. You don't have like EU countries that would have such a strong toll of the COVID-19 pandemic on the country. So I think that this was somehow definitely play a role in the general elections last year, because people were somehow fed up with the way that the prime minister handled the pandemic, one. And second, I think it also shows already kind of like taste of the populism of Ondřej Babiš, because actually the hugest toll was in the autumn 2020, if I'm not mistaken, like the second wave of COVID we've had in Europe, and the fact was that we had regional elections in October, and the number of cases were really going very up and up throughout September, and actually the government didn't want to impose any new lockdowns or other limitations before the election. So I think this shows, how precarious the situation was, and how strong the will to kind of, I don't want to say manipulate, but to have the best result at the elections was at the time. And this is exactly what led to this kind of like autumn wave. The first year of the pandemic led to this high toll of deaths from COVID. Now, another pretty strong aspect has to do also with geopolitics, and we are well before the Russian invasion. I don't know if you were aware, the picture here with the huge blast was the Verbětice explosion that took place already in, well, several years ago. I think it was 2014, 15. I mean, like it was already after the occupation of Crimea. Maybe the two faces you can see down here, Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Bushirov, may be familiar with you, because those are the guys who were sent to Salisbury, to the UK, to poison the Skripal during the Skripal affair in the UK. And it was actually only in 2021 when the government learned actually that this blast was made on purpose by those Russian GRU secret agents, with the main purpose actually to destroy arms that were supposed to be exported through Bulgaria, most probably, very probably to Ukraine, possibly also to Syria. I'm not sure if there was like some new steps in the investigation. But in any case, to say I don't want to say like Russian interference, though this is very strong Russian interference actually. So yeah, yes, let's do word. The Russian interference in the politics or in the Czech kind of like landscape actually started then much earlier than the war. And also President Zeman, who was actually not really respecting kind of like the limits put by the constitution, he also, as I said, was very much pro-Chinese and pro-Russian, and that also created a lot of political conflicts, with fears of secret information actually leaking by President Zeman's staff to Russia and so on. So one of the reasons why also that contributed to the change of the government, having now the right-wing center coalition since the end of 2021, is also this geopolitical loan. And you can just see some of the very frequent billboards by the winning right-wing coalition, saying, representing already the now presidential candidate and former PM Ondřej Babiš as a threat, alongside with the head of the Czech Communist Party. Also, Czechia is one of the last countries that it really has the Czech Communist Party that still until last year was still in the parliament, and this was the first time they didn't get it to the parliament pass over the 5% threshold. And the third guy you can see next to Ondřej Babiš is Tomio Okamura, who is a Czech politician whose father was Japanese, and he's kind of like a pet of foreign media. I would also say, for the reason that though he is half Japanese, he is actually heading the extreme right party that is arguing against migrants, and who's also very pretty pro-Russian. So that's one of the paradoxes. At the same time, I think I really need to underline, I don't know what the figures are now, but as of this summer, last summer actually, the Czech Republic was the country who received the most Ukrainian refugees per capita in the whole Europe. So this is to say that actually I think the support for Ukraine has a very, very large base among the population. Still, you can have, like, say, I would say 10 to 15% of those who would either vote for the extreme right party or don't vote, who would be like more pro-Russian or about like so-called independence of Czechia, being neither west or nor east. So this kind of discourse, but actually the lead up to this election is also a little bit by pretty strong sense of a unity that actually, again, Ondřej Babiš as the populist candidate wants to try to break, as we will see around the second round. The third factor, so we had the kind of like geopolitical factors, we had the COVID situation, and now also kind of like a snapshot of the economic situation. Now, actually, the Czech Republic may be a bit different from countries like Slovakia, where actually unemployment is relatively higher. The Czech Republic is actually the country with the lowest unemployment rate in Europe, or at least in the European Union, as you can see, 2.3%, which is, I think, at the more or less at levels, unemployment levels of the United States. Also, still having this kind of like social market economy and the social protection systems that were basically kept or somehow reformed from the communist era is still top 3 countries with the lowest income inequality. So it makes the society still relatively cohesive in a way. By the way, you can see that Ukraine, and just had an afterward like setting up this presentation, that maybe the level of equality of Ukraine may also be kind of like, I don't know, maybe a reason for the strong sense of unity with relatively little divisions, social divisions within the countries compared to other countries. But still, there are some problems. One problem is also that many people in the Czech Republic are still in a debt, especially in the regions, in the outside regions. So their kind of prospects for getting rid of debts and having decent life and consumptions are pretty limited. So even though this number is on low, so around still 7-8% of the population are somehow blocked economically. And now very likely the inflation. Again, the Czech Republic is the country with one of the highest inflation rates in Europe and also in the world. I think the average inflation for the last year was 15%, and wages just don't follow up. And again, I mean, I don't know what the kind of like perception of this is in the United States, but I think even the populist parties want to play the role or the kind of, say, like anti-Ukrainian discourse, saying that it is actually the sanctions against Russia that caused the high inflation rate. Just if you look at the figures, you can very well see that the inflation started going up like even before. Of course, it sped up in February, especially through the rise of energies and fuel. But the trend was there already, and actually the Russian invasion in Ukraine actually just accelerated this inflation we have been having, and actually other countries that are not that much affected by the Russian invasion still have very high inflation rates. So this is one of the perception of the social situation is also deteriorating, and this aspect definitely plays in the card of the populist candidate Ondřej Babiš, as we will see. So now coming to the 2 rounds. So the first round, we already can see the results, and I will also use the occasion to go quickly through the candidates, and I will tell you more details about the candidates later. Maybe one thing which is pretty interesting in terms of, say, electoral strategies is that you can see that both candidates already in the first round got together around 7% of votes. That's really a lot. It shows that even though this was just the third direct presidential elections, the electors really kind of think already runoff, right? And have tendency to support those candidates they think will have most chances to win. because that's a really interesting the way that people learn, because for the lower chamber of the parliament we have a proportional system, and for the Senate we have a majority system, but the participation is relatively low. But really wanted to support the strongest candidates that they thought would have the most chance. And of course the role of the polls is extremely important and followed also by the media. So this is the way that people decide. And you can see, except for Danuše Nerudová, we will present shortly, who was the only female candidate. Also, to become a presidential candidate, you need to be nominated by a number of members of the parliament, or to gather some 100,000 signatures. So there is a threshold also to have a kind of like a number of candidates. So we've had 8 this time. And then you see that the actual results were relatively weak, and the Danuše Nerudová, as the only candidate, went beyond 10%. Pavel Fischer, this kind of like conservative right candidate, got only 6.75%. Jaroslav Bašta, who is pretty important, and who was polled higher above the 5% that he had, was actually the candidate of the extreme right. And it seems that already even the electors of the extreme right already transferred the votes to the populist former MP Ondřej Babiš. There's not much interesting to say about the other candidates. So now let's present the 3 candidates. Oh, first, just also to show some pretty strong continuity, ecological interference method, which may not be totally precise, but that shows a very strong continuity between Zeman, who would not be basically present as a populist. He never had kind of like huge populist party. He was a former social democrat, but we can see that there is like strong part of the votes that went from the current president Zeman to Babiš. But at the same time, this graphic already shows that he's a little bit in a problem, because a good part of his votes actually went to candidates that are going to support most probably actually the non-populist candidate Petr Pavel, and only of course part of the populist Zeman went to the extreme right Bašta. So this figure already shows that Babiš may actually be in a bit of trouble. Now, I also wanted to show basically the electoral differences, the way that the factors I mentioned, like the social factors, actually play a role. So this shows that people who are in the it's not dismissal. I lost the English word, but basically the situation, you were indebted and you are at risk of seizure of your properties. Then we can see that in those border regions of the Czech Republic, the difference is about 10% to the benefit of the populist candidate Babiš, who actually got this kind of like vote of people who are in difficult social situation. By the way, again, history plays a role. Basically, you can see that these regions that are in the color purple basically corresponds to the regions from where the German citizens were actually expelled after World War II, and were somehow repopulated by people, especially from the countryside or people who didn't have enough property. And these are bordering regions, the Sudets of the Czech Republic, have still relatively weak social structure. So even, let's say, 70% years after the World War, you can see that even the election results are very much follow the outcomes of the Second World War, which is, I think, still pretty interesting. Then next, we can see also that on the other hand, there's a pretty like almost 15% difference for the say liberal democratic candidate from the regions where the share of people with A levels or metric, the way you call it in your country, is higher. So the vote is pretty much also connected not only with the social situation but also with the educations. And at the same time, we shouldn't forget that, and I think that's the very, clear explaining factors of the support of the PM Babiš, and that's actually the score of his party that he made during the last election. So you can see it's almost aligned. So again, the political relations, preferences of people in this regard are pretty stable. Now let's go through the through the candidates. I think a little bit advanced, so I will just go quickly. So the candidate now who is predicted to win is actually Petr Pavel, and who is always used with his title of general. He's a former general who became the chief of staff of the Czech Republic, and who then, by this kind of like rotation system, became the military chief of the whole NATO. He wasn't that known because of that, because people are not that much interested in, say, NATO or European politics. However, he started his campaign already several years ago, and slowly gaining support from the regions. He traveled a lot. And as you can see from the pictures, the way he presents himself in a lumberjack shirt, he likes to present himself as kind of like a normal guy, and I say kind of like corresponds to the desire of people for this kind of like normal president who is like rather modest. And at the same time, I think it's pretty interesting that if you have a look at his political priorities, there's never, you can see here, it's the same word in Czech as in English. You can see it's about energy and education and foreign policy. Never ever you can find the word social there. So even though he's not like kind of in principle a right-wing candidate, the absence of social issues in his campaign is, I think, quite striking. You can see that already last year he was polled at 21% just behind Ondřej Babiš, and his kind of like it was the experience and the way he was a diplomat and a hero, because he saved some guys and during a mission in Bosnia, I think. So this is the way that he presented. It's a pretty kind of like a modest, but don't want to say macho, but kind of like a modest, still masculine kind of like figure of a father or uncle, I think. Yeah, this just to give you an idea about the image he tries to prepare in the media. Now the big surprise was that for the first time we had a strong female candidate, which actually shows how the Czech politics are totally backward in the sense of a gender equality. The last polls, she was polled very high, actually, at equality with Ondřej Babiš, Petr Pavel, Danuše Nerudová. I don't have any data for that, but I think there was also alongside the kind of like reflex to vote for the stronger candidate, because still Petr Pavel was polled higher. I think there still was this kind of like shift for people. Okay, we cannot really trust women as a president. I don't have any data, but I think that kind of explains that she was polled at almost 25%, ended up at 13. So there was kind of like this trend. She presented herself more as a candidate of young people, and to the difference of Petr Pavel, who was like about like like order and peace idea. She was more presenting herself as the candidate of the change. Unfortunately, as a former dean of a university and as an economist, she had basically a campaign of selling PhD titles, more or less, and some are the publications. So she had an affair related to her academic performance and managerial performance as a rector that she wasn't really didn't really explain quickly when she was rising the polls, which was probably a mistake, because then it really also contributed to her bad score at the end. On the other hand, for the other candidate, Petr Pavel, we don't really know much about his performance because he was in the military. We don't really have any kind of knowledge about how good he was in his job. So there was also the disadvantage of her. And yeah, also the kind of bad family values. Important, say, very liberal on, say, LGBT issues. Actually, this is pretty interesting that I think, except for one candidate, the kind of conservative candidate who said that he would sign the equality marriage, all, and of course, except the extreme right candidate, all the other candidates are actually pro equality. So this is kind of also change, showing that actually the Czech Republic is maybe more liberal than we may perceive it in their larger region. Finally, we have Ondřej Babiš. So he's the kind of predicted to lose the second round. Someone who is very quickly, just to make a list, a billionaire with plenty of scandals. He's under an investigation by the French authorities for money laundering, for his mansion in the south of France, on the French Riviera. Quite interestingly, also, he was a member of the Communist Party, the same way that Petr Pavel was also a member of the Communist Party, which was, I say, 15 years ago, it would be basically impossible for them to get this position in the politics. Nowadays, also with younger voters, that's not really an issue. And it basically only shows because for these kind of top jobs in the military, like Petr Pavel, or in foreign trade, like Ondřej Babiš, who has his big background in the business, in the state business, in the 80s, you needed to be a communist, and actually, this led to their very nice careers nowadays. So last, before I conclude, so the predictions, as I said, are, I think it's pretty good time actually to talk about this, because probably there will be no surprises for the runoff. The other candidates, except the extreme right candidates, actually are behind Petr Pavel. So it's now really kind of anti-Babiš discourse. The difference between them is predicted to be about 10 points, which is pretty high. And also because you see that for Ondřej Babiš 6-1. So I really wouldn't recommend to bet on him. You only get 1.12 if you bet on Petr Pavel. So there's really not much. Well, there can always be surprises, which is very interesting. Is that just after the results of the first round, actually Ondřej Babiš launched a very fierce campaign against Petr Pavel, and which is very interesting is that he can try to imitate the Viktor Orbán move during the parliamentary elections in Hungary, saying the opposition or Petr Pavel as a military guy or former military guy will drag you into war with Russia. So this is something, an argument that was very strong in the Hungarian campaign, and that actually paid off, even though the Hungarian opposition against Viktor Orbán was pretty strong. Still, this argument was very strong. So this is kind of a little bit worrying to see Babiš trying to actually play on the fears on the fears of people of the war coming to Czechia. Okay, and this is my last slide. So again, compare maybe to other countries of the region, we can see that it is not that difficult or that risky to lose the liberal democratic majority in the country. Still, the media, the civil society ranks pretty high on all rankings in kind of like in terms of political freedoms and so on. I think the main explaining factor as compared to other countries like Slovakia, Hungary, may be that also the extreme right is relatively weaker, and altogether the kind of nationalist discourse in politics are also weaker. You know, I mean, even if you look at Polish politicians, the way that use the love of the nation, I think that's something that would really not go well with the Czech voters, who are more, maybe just more cynical about their nationalism. On the other hand, I would say that we can see what happens throughout Europe. The left is actually going down. Currently, there is no left-wing party in the government. This is like it was in Poland several years ago, that actually the left-wing parties were just completely wiped out from the parliament. And more generally in Europe, the socialist parties are also were going down, and you have majority of right-wing governments. If I still got it right in my head. The use of history, the past in the Communist Party doesn't really play a role. But there are also some worrying signs, as I said, the attempt at instrumentalizing anti-war sentiments and break somehow the pro-Ukraine unity, the way that Viktor Orbán did in Hungary. And also, I think very, very important, there is a kind of like growing place for female politicians, like in Slovakia. There was like several female candidates in Slovakia, until Slovakia was able to have her female president. I think the first time for Slovakia or Hungary, like in the southern dimension of the region. So yeah, so this is kind of like, this last point is a little bit ambiguous, that unfortunately we can see the kind of like anti-gender discourse pretty strong and against the female candidate. On the other hand, she reached a place where I think other female candidates can step on during the next elections, and this kind of gives me some hope. So I would stop here, and yeah, I took more time than I thought, but I think we still have some time for questions. So back to Pavel, I mean, to moderate this, and I will do my best to also to answer quickly and give you short answers to your questions.
All right, thank you, Ondřej. Yes, that was a bit longer than we expected. I'm just going to jump on the really interesting question coming from chat from Matthew Slabok. What do Czechs want from their president? ? Andrej Babiš was polarizing as prime minister, but current prime minister Petr Fiala is unpopular. Do Czechs want a strong president, one who could act as a potential Czech restraint on an unpopular prime minister? And if so, is the prospect of constitutional or legislative changes that would strengthen the president power realistic? I think that also frames, the developments in the whole region, where the parties or the parties in power try to change the institutional framing of the democracy or of the state. So maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. I think that definitely Babiš wants to present. There are also other types of billboards saying like, I will be against the government. But we have seen that the actual powers are rather limited. And I think that what we saw during the time with Andrej Babiš as prime minister, he was practically always acting within the constitution. I don't really think that he would really become now totally unchanged and change that much. he's a populist, but he's kind of a liberal populist, to put it kind of like a mild. Also, the Babish's party is a member of Renew, of the Liberal Democratic caucus in the European Parliament. So you cannot really equate his party with say Prawo i Sprawiedliwość in the Law and Justice Party in Poland, or with Orban's party. So it's rather different. So the powers are limited. There can be expectations, but I don't think so. And on the other hand, this kind of like a right-wing center coalition is relatively large. It also includes the Christian Democrats, who really put a lot of emphasis on social issues. So the kind of like dominating right-wing conservative party that is very liberal in terms of economic, I mean like more pro-market, they are also under pressure to abandon their tenets, or how to put it, their kind of like very pro-market agenda, and somehow also to do a little bit kind of like a shift, I would say, like actually the Polish Law and Justice Party, and becoming more like center-wing in terms of economics, and then also introduce programs and so on with inflation to be more pro-social. So yes, but is the current government really that unpopular? If it was really that unpopular, Babiš would probably have more support than he actually had already in the first round. And yeah, so as I said, the situation is not that dire. Of course, the opposition say, yeah, represented by Babiš, is that you were socially incentive, but basically the argument is you were too late in introducing caps on energy prices and so on. Again, the government plans, this kind of like runaway government plans to increase pensions next year above the inflation rate, you know. So the government is really slow, but I think that somehow they are managing to forbid the opposition to use those social arguments.
So, but this question is so far interesting, because Zeman was a very prominent actor in the political field, or in the political scene. So he was also a big personality. And then if you say that the governing party is driving neoliberal policies, that's also a driver for, you know, big personalities and, you know, people who say where the, you know, how the politics should be done. So that would actually support Babiš rather than Pavel, I guess. So if Pavel wins, which is high probable, what do you think is going to happen on the European level, or how is that going to impact Czech politics towards Ukraine, and the relation to, you know, how Czech Republic is relating to the war in Ukraine, and B, on the European politics?
If Pavel wins, you mean?
Yeah.
I don't think there would really be a lot of change, because at European level, actually, the main party in the government is pretty Eurosceptic. Now we have the presidency of the council since July to December. And actually, well, you have a little bit different position when you have the presidency the rotating presidency in the EU. But actually, it was more pro-integration than predicted. The times are really changing, and again, the right-wing government, the right-wing parties, kind of like abandon their kind of like pretty harsh judgments of the EU, and it was more like doing the EU the way we want to have it. And of course, they were more listened now on Russia and Ukraine in the European Union, which is also true for Poland and say Slovakia in the country. So yeah, so they were on a kind of like strong fruit without really being like as anti-European as expected. So I don't really think that would change. And also you can, in a way, you can see President Zeman also had some health issues. But yeah, he's a lame duck. I mean, so he didn't really block. I don't remember he would block anything that would regarding the EU presidency, and he's now pretty low profile on the international scene. And also, in addition to that, actually, well, at the time of Rebettice of the blast, just 1 year ago, before the invasion, he was still pro-Russian. He was like saying that the Czech or secret services that came up with the idea were like really bad and so on. But after the invasion, he really changed 180 degrees, and he supports Ukraine. So yeah, so everything is very in line, and I don't really expect there would be any change. Yeah. And also the thing is that I think that there other European governments have learned that you just don't listen to Zeman. You already know he doesn't represent the position of the Czech government. So yeah, so so yeah, I don't really expect, if Pavel wins, I don't expect basically any changes. Yeah.
All right. We don't have any more questions coming from the audience, and we are actually off the time, or after we ran out of time. So I think we have to wrap it up here. Thank you, Ondřej, for giving us the insights into the elections and also some of the history and more of the context for the coming political future in Czech Republic. Thank you for being us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Ingrid Gomez-O'Toole already posted this information in the chat. The next week's lecture is from Professor Giovanni Picker from University of Glasgow, and he will be talking about colonial and racist heritage of the 21st century's European cities. A very interesting topic, I think. Thank you for being us tonight, and I hope we will see you in the future. Please have a look at our webpage where you can see in the coming future the list of whole lectures in the lecture series Europe Today. Yeah, goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you for having me once again, and your series is really amazing. So so good luck with that for the whole semester. Thank you.
Thanks.